2 Samuel chapter 1. Excited to take a look at the reign of David. Last time we looked at the tale of two kings, and King Saul was the first king of Israel, who was head and shoulders above everyone else, but not a king after God's heart. He was a king, the kind of king that the people of Israel wanted. And it turned out that he was a miserable failure of a king. And he made some terrible decisions and really took Israel on a terrible path. And we wrapped up at the end of 1 Samuel 31, where it says that Saul and his sons died in battle. And actually his sons died in battle, and Saul was wounded in battle. And if you remember the story, Saul actually took his sword and he fell upon his own sword so that he wouldn't be taken captive by the Philistines. And so now Saul is dead at the end of 1 Samuel. And by the way, originally when these were all written, it was all just one book. From 1 Samuel to 2 Kings was all just one thick book about the kings of Israel. And thankfully we've got it kind of separated out a little bit, because 2 Samuel really highlights for us the reign of King David. It has 24 chapters in it. It's called 2 Samuel because it builds on the ministry of Samuel, but Samuel's already dead by now, and so Samuel obviously didn't write the book of 2 Samuel. Most likely it was finished off by other prophets like Nathan and Gad. But there are 24 books or chapters in the book, and they're divided pretty much right in half. And you could just sum them up like this. The first half of 2 Samuel, you have David's triumphs, his victories, his wins, the big victories in his life. And then the second half is David's troubles. And right in the middle is David's sin. And that's what makes the difference between his triumphs and his troubles, is when David makes this decision to sin. And so let's open up to 2 Samuel verse 1. It says, "Now it came to pass after the death of Saul, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had abode 2 days in Ziklag, it came to pass on the third day that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent, and earth upon his head. And so it was, when he came to David, that he fell to the earth and did obeisance. And David said unto him, From whence comest thou? And he said unto him, Out of the camp of Israel am I escaped. And David said unto him, How went the matter? I pray thee, tell me. And he answered, That the people are fled from the battle, and many of the people also are fallen and dead, and Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also. And David said unto the young man that told him, How knowest thou that Saul and Jonathan his son be dead? And the young man that told him said, As I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me, and called unto me, and I answered, Here am I. And he said unto me, Who art thou? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. That's significant, isn't it? Who was Saul supposed to exterminate when he spared the king and spared all the sheep and stuff? The Amalekites. Now an Amalekite comes up to him, and so here's his report continued to David. And he said unto me again, Stand, I pray thee, upon me, and slay me, for anguish has come upon me, because my life is yet whole in me. So I stood upon him and slew him, because I was sure that he could not live after he was fallen. And I took the crown that was upon his head and the bracelet that was on his arm, and have brought them hither unto my Lord. Now this man, it seems that he's lying, because we just read how Saul died. He fell upon his own sword and died. He finished off his own life. And so this young man, this Amalekite, apparently finds Saul and the crown and all this stuff. And then he concocts this story, no doubt thinking, I'm going to get a reward from David because I'm the one who killed his enemy Saul. And so he makes up this story to gain favor with David. But it totally backfires on him, because David is mournful for Saul and for Jonathan. Verse 13, And David said unto the young man that told him, "Whence art thou?" And he answered, "I am the son of a stranger, an Amalekite." And David said unto him, "How wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" And David called one of the young men and said, "Go near and fall upon him." And he smote him that he died. You killed the king. You're going to die. And this is how David acts. It's not revenge. He now is the anointed of God. He is in charge. He is the king, and it's his job to execute justice. And as far as he's just heard a confession from this young man that he has murdered the king of Israel, and David says, "Okay, then you will die." And that little lie didn't help out very well at all. And so David then he sings and he mourns for Saul, mourns for Jonathan. And then chapter 2, he inquires of the Lord what he's supposed to do next. He goes to the people of Judah. In verse 4 it says, "And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying that the men of Jabesh Gilead were they that buried Saul." And so do you remember how many tribes are in Israel? Anybody? Okay. 12. The 12 tribes of Israel plus the Levites, right? Which would make 13. So out of all those tribes of Israel, one shows up to anoint David king. His tribe, the tribe that he was from, the tribe of Judah. They anoint him king there in Hebron, and he becomes king for the next 7 years only of the tribe of Judah. Well, what happened to the other tribes? I mean, who's their king? Well, in their minds, their rightful king was Saul. They don't have this allegiance to David necessarily. He's not from their tribe. Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. And so what they do is they try to set up Saul's son, Ishbosheth, as the next king. And so that's what happens. Ishbosheth is also anointed king. Verse 8, "But Abner, the son of Ner, captain of Saul's host, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and made him king over Gilead." So Ishbosheth is reigning there. And suddenly this conflict begins, because in the minds of Judah, David is the rightful king. He's been anointed by God. In the minds of the rest of the Israelites, Ishbosheth should be king. And so this civil war begins to take place. Chapter 3, verse 1, "Now there was long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, but David waxed stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul waxed weaker and weaker." And of course, that's because it was God's intention to make David king over all Israel. Well, there's this trouble that takes place between Abner. Now, I'm trying to help you with the characters. We're going so fast, it's hard to develop these characters. But Abner was the main general of the armies underneath King Saul. He's the one who props up Ishbosheth as the next king. Now, Abner takes one of Saul's concubines, one of his, I guess you could call her a lower class wife, something like that, and one of his servant wives, and he takes one of Saul's old concubines to be his wife, and then Ishbosheth gets onto him, rebukes him, like, "Who do you think you are, taking a concubine of the king?" And all of this erupts over a woman, and this strife. These two are kind of torn apart here. And look at chapter 3, verse 9. So, verse 8, "Then was Abner very wroth for the words of Ishbosheth, and said, Am I a dog's head, which against Judah do show kindness this day unto the house of Saul thy father, to his brethren and to his friends, and have not delivered thee into the hand of David, that thou chargest me today with a fault concerning this woman? So do God to Abner, and more also, except as the Lord hath sworn to David, even so I do to him, to translate the kingdom from the house of Saul, and to set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan even to Beersheba. And he could not answer Abner a word again, because he feared him." And so Abner begins to do just that. He sends messengers out throughout all of Israel saying, "Listen, David is truly the anointed of God. David really ought to be your king. And he starts disseminating this propaganda that David ought to be king. And he starts to change the hearts of the people of Israel. And Ishbosheth now sees that he is in big trouble. Chapter 4. And when Saul's son heard so who's Saul's son? Ishbosheth. Heard that Abner was dead in Hebron. Okay, so there's a little gap there. I got to fill you in. Abner makes a deal with David. He comes and makes a deal, says, I'm going to bring the kingdom over to your side, but I get to be your general. Does anybody know who David's general is? Anybody remember? We probably just mentioned him one time or something. His name is Joab. He's a nephew of David's. And so Joab is the actual general of David's forces. Abner makes a deal to become general, which means Joab's going to get demoted. Joab didn't deal very kindly with this. And so Joab murdered Abner. Joab is a ruthless guy. David is up here, and he's just this ethical ruler, you know. Joab is the guy who's alongside of him and loyal to him that does all the dirty work. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty, and he really has no moral compass whatsoever. And so Joab murders Abner, and now Ishbosheth is terrified. Abner's made a deal with David. He spread all this stuff in Israel about David, and now Abner is dead, so there's nobody left to help him. And it says, his hands were feeble, and all the Israelites were troubled, and Saul's son had 2 men that were captains of bands. So these are his men. These are his captains. The name of the one was Baanah, the name of the other Rechab, the son of Rimmon of Beerothite, of the children of Benjamin. Verse 6. And they came thither into the midst of the house, as though they would have fetched wheat, and they smote him under the 5th rib, and Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped. So these 2 servants come in and assassinate Ishbosheth, and he dies in his bed. They run up to David, and they're all excited, and they're like, David, we killed him! We did it! We got rid of your enemy Ishbosheth! Now there's nothing standing in the way of you being king. What do you think David did with that? David doesn't like murderers, all right? Now, for whatever reason, he tolerated Joab. And maybe because he was family, eventually Joab always seems to find some kind of leverage over David, you know, to keep himself in position. But he does not like murderers. And so David, verse 9 of chapter 4, David answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, verse 10, when one told me, saying, behold, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good tidings, I took hold of him and slew him in Ziklag, who thought that I would have given him a reward for his tidings. How much more when wicked men have slain a righteous person in his own house upon his bed, shall I not therefore now require his blood of your hand and take you away from the earth? And David commanded his young men, and they slew him and cut off their hands and feet and hanged them up over the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the sepulchre of Abner in Hebron. So David he's trying to start off right. He's not honoring wicked, murderous people. He's executing justice right away. And then in chapter 5, all the tribes gather to David and say, okay, you're our guy. You know, we got off course with this Ishbosheth thing, but we want you to be our king. And so now all of the tribes of Israel unite under one banner. And verse 3, so all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron. And King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned 30 and 3 years over all Israel and Judah. And so now he is king, and which is wonderful. I mean, you think about all the promises that David had up to this point. Anointed as this young man, and he's been on the run, and this great journey that he's been on, and now all of those promises are coming to pass, and he is anointed king now for the third time, and he is king over all of Israel. And David had in his heart, no doubt from God himself, the desire to take a city, a special city that had never been taken since the days of Joshua. When Joshua and the Israelites came in, they left a certain city. The Benjamites left this city and didn't take it, and it was known as Salem or Jerusalem. The city, back then it was known as Jebus, place of the Jebusites. The Jebusites were Canaanites, and it was this fortified city on a hill. And they just didn't even try to take it. The Benjamites didn't. Jerusalem was not far from Bethlehem, where David grew up. No doubt David had seen Jerusalem on many occasions and probably thought to himself, this flies in the face of our God. To have this fortified city of the Canaanites smack dab in the middle of our inheritance. This ought not to be. And so God puts it in the heart of David to take Jerusalem. And he offers this reward to whoever would go up first. And Joab goes, and he sneaks inside to the city, and he opens up the gates, and the Jebusite city was taken. It became the city of David then. And he moves the capital of Israel to Jerusalem, which is where it would be forever after that point. And so verse 9, so David dwelt in the fort and called it the city of David. And David built round about from Millo and inward. And David went on and grew great, and the Lord of hosts was with him. Then David, verse 12, David perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. And then his next desire was to change the worship of the people. Remember before, the tabernacle would just kind of go around from place to place, and it was in Shiloh, and then it was in this place called Nob, and there was no centralized location to worship. And now it was becoming obvious God was establishing a kingdom. He had established this capital, and now David in chapter 6, he wants to bring the ark to Jerusalem. Verse 2 of chapter 6, David arose and went with all the people that were with him from Baalah of Judah to bring up from thence the ark of God, whose name is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, that dwelleth between the cherubims. And they set the ark of God upon a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab that was in Gibeah. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drave the new cart. Now time out. Think back. Think back to Exodus and Leviticus, all right, when we were going through all of that. When they built the ark, does anybody remember how they were supposed to transport the ark? Men on each side, right? They had built into it these rings and these staves that would slide into the rings. And so 4 of the priests, the Levites, would hoist it up onto their shoulders with those staves, and that's how it was supposed to be transported. Well, when they lost the ark to the Philistines, back in the days of Eli and Hophni and Phinehas, remember the Philistines had the ark for a while, and it tipped their god Dagon down, and it smote them with all these plagues and stuff. Well, when they wanted to get rid of it, the Philistines, not knowing any better, put the thing on this cart and sent it back to Israel. So Israel saw it came on a cart. They didn't even do their homework to figure out how they're supposed to transport the thing. It's been in the house of this one guy since then, since that time, and God has blessed that household because of it. And now they throw it back up on a cart. They're like, all right, let's bring it to Jerusalem. Everybody's excited and everything. They come, the cart and the oxen come to this threshing floor, and they cross over the threshing floor, this big concrete slab. It's kind of like if you drove your car up over a curb, you know, boom, 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 boom. And they drive this cart up over the threshing floor, and as they do, the ark begins to tip. Can you imagine if the Ark of the Covenant fell out of that cart and cracked open? I remember seeing one time somebody moving a bunch of furniture and stuff, and they threw a piano in the back of a pickup truck, and they didn't strap it down or anything, and somebody took a hard turn, and that whole piano fell out of the back of the pickup truck, strings all over the place, wood shattered. Can you imagine if that was the Ark of the Covenant that had shattered? And so one of the young men who grew up with the ark in his home, they're in charge of transporting it. And he's in the back. He sees the ark start to tip over out of the cart. And he puts his hand out to steady the thing. And on the spot, he dies. Because it's a holy artifact. It is not to be touched by anybody. That is a symbol of the presence of God. And so God smites Uzzah. And let's read it there, verse 6 and 7. When they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error, and there he died by the ark of God. And so then obviously, party's over. They pull the ark into the nearest home, the home of Obed-Edom. And it just stays right there. Nobody dares move it for a long period of time. And the Lord blesses the house of Obed-Edom because it's there. Verse 12, and it was told to King David, saying, the Lord hath blessed the house of Obed-Edom, and all that pertaineth unto him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness. Look at this. And it was so that when they that bear the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he offered oxen and fatlings. So in the meantime, they go back to the law. They do their homework. They figure out, Levites are supposed to bear the ark. No wonder. And now they've got guys bearing the ark. And they go 6 paces. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And after 6 paces of the ark, they stop. Okay, time for sacrifices. And they burn a sacrifice to God. They go another 6 paces. This would have taken all day. But they're just excited. There's music, there's dancing, there's all this stuff going on because the ark is coming to its permanent place in Jerusalem. David is dancing around, and he just doesn't even care what he looks like. And his wife comes out at the end of this chapter. His wife looks out, and she sees her husband just dancing around. And, he's girded up his loins. Remember when we talked about that? How you have to pull the loose stuff up and everything. And so his legs are a little bare, and he's dancing around. And she looks, and she just does this eye roll. You look ridiculous, David. What are you doing? You're all uncovered, and the women are gawking at you, and you're the king, for crying out loud. My father was king. You'd have never caught him doing something like this. That's her as she despised him in her heart, and she gets all sarcastic with him. Verse 20, returned to his household. Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovereth himself. And David said unto Michal, it was before the Lord, which chose me before thy father, and before all his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore will I play before the Lord, and I will be yet more vile than thus, and will be base in mine own sight, and of the maidservants which thou hast spoken of them shall I be had in honor. Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child unto the day of her death. And so apparently David was in the right here, that he didn't care what he looked like. He didn't care his image or preserving that. That was what Saul was all about. He was all about image. David was about genuine praise to God. And if he looked ridiculous in the process, then so be it. He just had a heart for God. And so he brings the ark to Jerusalem. And then the next chapter, he wants to do something very special for God. I mean, God has established David. God has given him a home and a palace and a capital and all this stuff. And he looks over, and where is the ark? It's in this little tent. You know, this little basic tent like they would have had in the wilderness. And David's thinking, this just doesn't seem right. I'm in this beautiful palace, and the ark of God is in a tent. And so he calls Nathan in. Nathan is the prophet during that time that has come up since Samuel has died. And he says to Nathan, it's in my heart to make God a house. I want to make him a palace. Make him a house out of cedar. And Nathan, verse 3, said to the king, go, do all that is in thine heart, for the Lord is with thee. So Nathan gets excited about it right away. He's on board. He says, this sounds great. I think that's a great idea, king. Let's do it. And Nathan turns to walk out, and while he's leaving the palace, God says, get back in there. Tell David this, verse 4. And it came to pass that night that the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, go and tell my servant David, thus saith the Lord, shalt thou build me an house for me to dwell in? And so he goes on and says, I've never asked for a house before. I don't want you to build me a big house. I don't need all of that. In fact, verse 11, and since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and have caused thee to rest from all thine enemies, also the Lord telleth thee that he will make thee an house. David, it's not your job to make me a house. In fact, I'm going to make you a house. I'm going to establish your household, your lineage, over the throne of Judah forever. And he establishes this covenant with David, an important covenant here. Verse 12, and when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom, and he shall build an house for my name. So the idea that will become established later on is that David is a man of war. David's a killer, okay? He chopped the head off of Goliath. He's killed many people. He will kill many people. He's a man of war. And God desires a house to be built, but not by a man with such bloody hands. He wants a king of peace to reign over his people and to build him a house. And that's what Solomon will be. And so he says, Solomon, will build an house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I put away before thee. And thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. How long do you think forever means in the Bible? It means forever. Okay? David and David's seed, his lineage, his dynasty, God said, will never end. There will never be an end to this dynasty. That's pretty incredible to think about. There have been a lot of long dynasties in China, in Egypt, in England. You know, the royalty in England now goes back to like Alfred the Great in the 8th century or something. I mean, it goes so far back. There are long dynasties, but no dynasty is longer than that of the house of David. And so what this is a promise that God is setting up a throne, not just for David, but for the son of David. You know who the son of David is? It's Jesus. Because the dynasty continues, and we're going to learn about it in Kings and Chronicles and stuff. The dynasty in Judah continues all the way until they are carried away to Babylon. And then there's no more kings. Ever since the people of Israel and Judah went into Babylonian captivity, it's like there's been a pause, and there hasn't been a king over on the throne of David since that point. But that doesn't mean the dynasty is over. It just means it's paused right now. There will be a son of David, the son of David, to sit upon the throne of David in the New Jerusalem, and guess how long that reign will last? Forever. Forever. Until heaven and earth pass away, the Son of David will reign upon the throne of Jerusalem. And so if you follow what's going on here, I want to bring your mind back to this overall promise, this theme of the volume of the book. In the volume of the book, it is written of me, Jesus said. In the volume of the book, it is written of me. This whole Bible is called, I have a commentary, a kind of a thick one, and it's called The Unfolding Drama of Redemption. I mentioned it when we first started. The Unfolding Drama of Redemption. And it's a great theme for the Bible, because that's what it is. That mankind sinned in the beginning, and then God came with a promise. Came with a promise that there would be one that would come of the seed of the woman to bruise the serpent's head. There would be a Redeemer that would come to mankind, and then people began waiting and looking forward to this Messiah, this Redeemer. And then the next covenant came to Abraham. And so not just would the Redeemer be from mankind, but it would be from this nation, this people of Israel. And in the people of Abraham. And then the covenant passed on from Israel to his son Judah, and says that the scepter shall never depart out of Judah. So you go from the race of humankind to the nation of Israel, to the tribe of Judah, and he would be called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And now it is narrowed down even further to the family of David. And he will be the son of David. And so you see this idea of a Redeemer coming, and it's getting narrower and narrower. And in the fullness of time, Jesus will come. And I'm excited when we finally get to that point. We've got a ways to go yet in our series, but it's shaping up. The throne is now established upon which that Christ will rule and reign from Jerusalem, this new capital. I mean, everything is pointing and foreshadowing the millennial reign of Jesus Christ here. And so God makes this everlasting covenant with David. Chapter 8 just highlights some of David's victories. Remember what happened when Saul died? They lost, didn't they? They lost to the Philistines. They were not in a good position. David comes to the throne, and immediately God begins giving them victories. Look at verse 6. Then, verse 1, and it came to pass and after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them. Makes it sound kind of easy. Verse 2, and he smote Moab. Verse 3, David smote also Hadadezer. Verse 5, and when the Syrians of Damascus came to succor Hadadezer, the king of Zobah, David slew of the Syrians 22,000 men. Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus, and the Syrians became servants to David and brought gifts. And the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. And so on and on, there's just this list. And anybody who comes against David, they fall. First of all, God is on David's side, and he's preserving him. Secondly, David is a good military leader. He's wise, he's educated, he's a genius in these things, and God has just blessed him in that way. And so you think about how instantly he is lifting Israel from this dominated, lowly tribal people to this empire that is ruling over all the nations around them, and now he's getting tribute from all of them. Can you imagine if Israel just decided that today, Israel said, you know what, those Palestinians, which the word Palestinian comes from Palestinian, Palestinian, okay? So the Palestinians of today, are in some way connected down through the ages to the Philistines. But can you imagine if Israel today said, you know what, the Palestinians, we're going to take over their land, all of it. And, you know, over in Syria where all this mess is going on and ISIS and all this stuff, you know what, we're just going to take care of that as well. And we're going to put up outposts in Damascus and we're just going to have an empire here. I mean, people have outcries whenever Israel does anything to defend themselves. And here they were just conquering, on and on and on. And look it down to verse 14. He put garrisons in Edom. And throughout all Edom put he garrisons, and all they of Edom became David's servants. And the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. And David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and justice unto all his people. I mean, what an administration. On foreign side, God preserved him everywhere he went. Success after success after success, just triumph. And then at home, in domestic issues and administration there at home, it says that he executed judgment and justice unto all his people. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a leader of a nation like that, who was wise and strong on the foreign front, and who was executing judgment and justice and fair on the domestic front? That's who David was. He was just the ideal king. And probably, no doubt, the best king that Israel has ever had. Solomon was probably a lot wealthier than David was. He rose to higher greats even than David did. But David as a man, as a leader, as a king, was the best that Israel has ever known. He became the standard, the measuring stick that everybody else would be measured by after him. And so he has all of these victories. And then chapter 9 talks about how he is kind to the son of Jonathan. Jonathan was kind of his bosom buddy. He was his best friend. And they had made a pact together and he promised Jonathan he would be kind to his family. And so Mephibosheth is a son of Jonathan who is lame on his feet, and David brings him to the palace, to kind of adopts him almost, and he dwells there at the king's table. Chapter 10. More victories. Here's the children of Ammon. And so he's in chapter 8, he conquered the Moabites. Here in chapter 10, he conquers the Ammonites. This morning in Sunday school, we talked about where the people of Moab and Ammon came from. They came from Lot, didn't they? And they were the enemies of the people of Israel. And now David is ruling over them as well. And so you've got all of these things going on, and Joab is continuing to lead the people, and things are just going great. And now we get about 20 years into David's reign, about in the middle of his time on the throne, and it's just triumph after triumph after triumph. No matter what he puts his hands to, he's succeeding and he's doing well. And he starts to get very confident in Joab, in his armies. The next verse, verse 1 of chapter 11, and it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle. So it's time, there's a season of year, a time of the year when it was just wartime. That's when the kings all got together and they battled it out and they did what they had to do. But when the kings were supposed to go forth to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried still at Jerusalem. And so he wasn't where he was supposed to go. In verse 2, and it came to pass in an evening tide that David arose from off his bed. Wait a second. It's evening, and David's been on his bed all day. I mean, he's getting indulgent, right? He's getting lazy. He doesn't want to be out in battle. He'd rather be sleeping all day in the palace. Gets off his bed. He's just being kind of lazy, indulging his flesh. And walked upon the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman washing herself. And the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman. He doesn't just leave it alone, doesn't bounce his eyes, doesn't try to undo the temptation, but he sent and inquired after the woman. And one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Which Eliam and Uriah are both mighty men of David. He knows these men. These are loyal men. And she's related to these. It's the daughter of one of them, the wife of another. And yet he sends messengers and took her and commits adultery there with Bathsheba. And then he finds out, verse 5, the woman conceived and sent and told David and said, I am with child. And so he sends for Uriah and tries to get him to go home and concoct a situation where it can seem like, oh, this is Uriah's kid, you know. But he won't do it. Uriah doesn't go down to his house. He doesn't feel right, doesn't feel ethical that all of his brethren are out there on the battlefield. And he's like, what, am I going to go home and just spend the night with my wife and enjoy all of that? No, I'm not doing that, king. I can't do that. And so he just stays with the king's servants. He won't go. And so David pens a letter. And he writes a letter to his general Joab. Verse 14, came to pass in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter, saying, set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. And he seals his letter, hands it to Uriah, says, see that this get to Joab. And he so trusts Uriah that Uriah won't even open it. And in it is his own death warrant. So they set the battle. They put everybody up close to the wall, and then Joab gives the order, and everybody retreats from around Uriah, and Uriah dies in battle. It's all real neat and tidy, and David has no guilt as far as anybody can pin onto him anyway. Well, some time goes by, and he marries Bathsheba, tries to cover the whole thing up, and basically succeeds in that, until the prophet Nathan comes up to David, and he weaves this story for him, about a man who had just one little lamb, almost like a pet lamb. And then this rich man who has all these sheep, and the rich man had a guest coming to his house, and he takes the one sheep from the poor man and uses that to feed his guests. And David just gets mad because the inner shepherd comes out in him, you know, and he's mad. He took his pet sheep and he killed that and used it to feed. This guy ought to die. He ought to die. He's going to pay back fourfold. I mean, he is in big trouble. And Nathan looks at the king and he says, thou art the man. You had all of this, and you went over to your neighbor who has his one wife that he delights in, and you took her for yourself. You're the man, David. And David spills his guts, and he confesses everything that's happened. He's repentant before God. He's sad about all this. Chapter 12 now, verse 9. Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house. God forgives David, bottom of 13. Nathan said unto David, the Lord also hath put away thy sin, thou shalt not die. Howbeit, because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. And so instantly the child gets sick, and David begins to pray and to fast and to weep for this child, this innocent one that is going to be the first consequence, the judgment of his sin. And then the child dies. And when the child dies, verse 20 says, then David arose from the earth and washed and anointed himself, changed his apparel, and came into the house of the Lord and worshipped. And they ask him, what's going on here? Why were you more sad before he died, and now you're up and eating and everything? Verse 23, but now he is dead. Wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. And that's a great, great verse of the confidence that David had that this little one, this little infant, when he died, David said, I know where he is. I know he's with God, and I will go to be with him, even though he can't come to be with me right now. And it's one of the great verses that we know that God watches over the young, and they have this protection upon them until the day that they become accountable for their own sins, and they can make their own decision before God. When a child or a baby dies, we know that they go straight to heaven and to where we can see them again. But when this happens, this divides the life, the reign of David in half. After this, just like the prophet Nathan said, the sword would not depart out of David's house. The first problem, the very next chapter, in chapter 13, his oldest son Amnon took notice of his stepsister Tamar, wanted to have her, but didn't go about it the right way. A wicked friend, Jonadab, a nephew of David's, Jonadab concocts this scheme where he should just take her. And he does, and he forces his half-sister Tamar and then pushes her out and doesn't want to marry her or have anything to do with her anymore. Well, her full brother is Absalom. And from that day forward, chapter 14, verse 22, and Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar. Now, the verse before that, it says when King David heard all these things, he was very wroth. But for some reason, David doesn't do justice here. There was a law, and the son should have been prosecuted. The son should have died. But perhaps it was because of David's own moral failings that David says, you know what? I messed up too, and God forgave me. I guess I need to be lenient with my son. And he doesn't do justice for Tamar where he should have. And now Absalom is infuriated because he knows that Amnon deserves to die. And Absalom begins scheming. And he works out this situation where all the king's sons would show up for a party. And at the opportune moment, Absalom's servants came up and killed Amnon. And so now you have just strife and murder and all of this stuff going on right within his family. Amnon is dead. Absalom has to flee the country. Eventually, Absalom wants to come back. And so Joab kind of works as an intermediary and brings Absalom back into the kingdom. As soon as Absalom shows up, look at chapter 15, verse 1. It came to pass after this that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And it was so that when any man that had a controversy came to the king for judgment, then Absalom called unto him and said, Of what city art thou? And he said, Thy servant is from one of the tribes of Israel. Basically, he just says, oh, you know what? If I were in a decision-making capacity, I know what I would do. You've got a good matter. You've got a good case there. Unfortunately, the line is so long, you'll probably never get to see the king. And so little by little, he meets with the people of Israel, and he starts building his brand, as it were. And pretty soon he starts to turn. Look at the end of verse 6. It says, On this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So everybody starts talking. You know that Absalom, he's a good leader. He sure talks well. He could lead well. He looks smart. You know, he looks good. He looks like the kind of king we would want. Maybe Absalom ought to be our king. And pretty soon he makes his move. He goes to Hebron, and Absalom is anointed king in this rebellion against his father. He and his men march on Jerusalem. David knows Absalom's not going to quit here. He means business, and he will slaughter everyone in this city to get the throne. And David said, I don't want that on my conscience. So David and his people pack up, and they leave Jerusalem. They just surrender it. They say, you know what? If God wants us back on the throne, He'll make it happen. So they leave that night. And there was this great conspiracy. Some of David's most closest advisors and friends turned and went with Absalom. Absalom pursues after David. And David had told his generals and his captains and everybody, if you find Absalom, deal gently with him, okay? Take him alive. Well, Joab comes up upon Absalom. Absalom's riding through, I think I've told this story before, but Absalom's riding through the forest on his donkey and on his horse, and he's got this long hair, this long, luscious, flowing hair, and he gets caught in a branch of the tree. And the horse just keeps on going, and he's hanging there, dangling by his hair. And Joab's told about this. Joab goes out there, grabs 3 arrows, flings them right into his heart. Directly contradicted David's commandment on that situation. But Absalom died as a result of that rebellion. And David returns back to Jerusalem. On the heels of that, chapter 20. So that was a long story packed into a little piece of time there. But chapter 20, there happened to be there a man of Belial. So again, Belial is like a name for the devil, okay? A wicked man, a man of Belial, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite. And he blew a trumpet and said, "We have no part in David, neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man do his tents, O Israel." So another rebellion right on the heels of this. Now it's not in his family. Now the nation of Israel is saying, you know what? We made a mistake with David. It's been nothing but trouble the last few years. We don't want him anymore. And there's this big rebellion. He goes into this fortified city, this Sheba does, thinking that he'll be safe and have this support. And Joab shows up, and Joab's about to lay that city to the ground. I mean, Joab is ruthless. And this woman pops up over the wall, and she says, why are you going to devour our city? Why are you going to destroy us? And Joab says, I don't want to destroy you, but Sheba's in there, and I'm not stopping until he's dead. And so she says, well, just wait right here, and we'll take care of it. And she goes back and persuades the city to kill Sheba, and they throw his head over the wall, and they're like, now go away. And so like that, the rebellion of Sheba is over. Okay, David continues to be king, praise the Lord. There's a famine in chapter 21, psalm in chapter 22. As a matter of fact, we've preached this psalm before, and it's the same. You can make a note if you want to in your Bible. 2 Samuel 22 is the exact same as Psalm 18. All right, so this is the situation where God has reestablished David as king. He's taken care of all his enemies. He writes Psalm 18. Chapter 23 is the list of David's mighty men. And then chapter 24, verse 1, it says, "And again the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, go number Israel and Judah." He wants to take a census. He wants to number how many are in his army. Verse 3, "And Joab said unto the king, Now the Lord thy God add unto the people how many soever they be, an hundredfold." I mean, basically, it doesn't matter how many we have in our army if God is on our side. Hey, some wisdom coming from ruthless Joab here. Doesn't matter how many we have, king. We don't trust in the numbers. We trust in God to give the victory. And that the eyes of my Lord the king may see it. But why doth my Lord the king delight in this thing? Notwithstanding the king's word prevailed against Joab. And so he goes out to number the people. Well, God is very displeased at this. It's a prideful thing in David. It's a show of we're trusting in our own might rather than the might of God. And verse 10, "And David's heart smote him after they had numbered the people. And David said unto the Lord, I have sinned greatly in that I have done. And now I beseech thee, O Lord, take away the iniquity of thy servant, for I have done very foolishly." Another prophet shows up. His name is Gad. And God says, there's going to be consequences, but I'm going to give you a choice. You can choose one of 3 things. Verse 13, "So Gad came to David and told him and said unto him, Shall 7 years of famine come unto thee in thy land? Or wilt thou flee 3 months before thine enemies while they pursue thee? Or that there be 3 days pestilence in thy land? Now advise, and see what answer I shall return to him that sent me." And so David just pleads God's mercy, and God says, okay, I guess that's your answer. I'm going to send a pestilence. And so for several days, this plague sweeps through Israel, and 70,000 people die. You want to count people? How about you count dead bodies, David? And all these people are dying, and David is devastated because his sin now has trickled down, and everybody is reaping the consequences. They see the angel that is slaying the people. And verse 17, David spake unto the Lord when he saw the angel that smote the people, and said, Lo, I have sinned, and I have done wickedly, but these sheep, what have they done? Let thine hand, I pray thee, be against me and against my father's house. And Gad came that day to David and said unto him, Go up, rear an altar unto the Lord in the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. And so he goes up to the top of this hill, this special place. It's also known as Mount Moriah, the mountain where Abraham offered Isaac. And that's where this threshing floor, this farm, was set up. And David went and bought the whole works, the whole threshing floor and the oxen and everything. Sets up this quick altar. They offer a sacrifice to God, and the plague stops immediately. And God He doesn't heal those who died, of course, but heals those that are still living. And he buys the whole thing. In verse 25, and David built there an altar unto the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the Lord was entreated for the land, and the plague was stayed from Israel. Now David's not quite done yet, but he's about done. He's old now. And that's the most of his life. And so it starts off so good, doesn't it? So triumphant. And it ends with so much trouble. And right smack dab in the middle, that is the hinge between triumph and trouble, is David's sin with Bathsheba and Uriah. And I think that makes the lesson for us quite obvious here tonight. That you can have God's victory in your life, or you can have the consequences of sin in your life. And some of us are going to reap consequences. That's just going to happen. Sins in the past, even sins that have been forgiven, there will be consequences. But you don't have to sow new sins, new seeds of sin. You can experience victory. You can experience triumph. I want it to be that it's said of my life that whatever he put his hand to, the Lord preserved him. The Lord prospered him. The Lord helped him to win, to have victory, to grow, to do these great triumphs for God's glory. And not that David had trouble in his family, had trouble in his nation, brought death and destruction to people because of his pride, of his sin. And it's very obvious from this that we have a choice. Now, not all trouble is a consequence of sin, but a lot of it is. And we can have a choice whether we will be victorious, just like we're standing in the battle and putting on the whole armor of God, or if we want to become indulgent and do what we want to do. And now a lot of times that's where it just kind of comes to, that Christians have to make a choice. Am I going to stand? Am I going to do what's right, even when it's weary, even when it's hard? Or am I just going to decide, you know what, I'm kind of tired of that. I'm going to do what I want to do for a change. And when you do that, you go down the road that David went down, and you will experience in a turning point from triumph to trouble. And that is not the way we want it to happen. And yet, David was quick to confess his sin. He was tender towards his sin. And when we fail, not if we fail, when we fail, we need to confess our sin quickly and bring it back to God and get it right. Because at the end of the day, as great as David's sins were, he was still called a man after God's own heart. He still was the greatest king that Israel has ever known. And I think we still ought to be able to look at David as an example of what a believer ought to be, in spite of his failings. Matter of fact, by the time you get to 1 Chronicles, it doesn't say anything about David's sin. Years and years have passed by that point when they write 1 Chronicles. But they look back at the record of David and all that David accomplished for God. And what's wonderful is that throughout the years, the sin kind of fades into the distance, and David's triumphs come to play. And that, aren't you thankful that through the forgiveness of God, the sin of the past fades away and new victories emerge, what God wants us to accomplish for His glory? Wow, what a life. What a life. Someday we'll take an in-depth look at the life of David, and we'll just mine that out, but now is not the time for it. And so we'll leave that for another date. Let's pray. Father, thank you for giving us this example of David.